excited to share with you some of what we found. So, Karen, I'm just going to ask
guys.
you to...
Sorry, Brandon. Can I just interrupt for 2 seconds?
Yeah.
Oh, recording. Okay, Karen. I just wanted to say you're going to record.
Got you, Bill.
Cool. Could I just ask, Karen, I'm about to go into what I call NASA view. So on my setup here, I'm just looking at my own presentation and a slight reflection of Brandon in a screen. It's not great. So just let me know if things are working or not. Cool, everybody. So the question that we are here to answer is who's listening to Star. This journey we started quite a long time ago. The station had only been on air for a month or two, and it's pretty hard, obviously, to find people when something just starts and launches. And we managed through the work that we do to get a viable sample, like just more than 100 people who ticked a box. To say listen to Star FM, and for the first time in a very short period of time since the station launched, we actually have a story to tell you. So first of all, let me just quickly tell you what BrandMapp is. I'm not going to get too deep into this. If you want the full creds pack, we can go into that at a later date. Essentially, South Africa, when you break it up by household income, looks like this. 70% of adults live in households earning under 10,000 Rand a month. It's the very bottom of the pyramid. We don't really look at those people. We look at the top 2 pieces of the pyramid. So that's about 12.8 million people who earn more than 10,000 Rand a month in household income. So when you hear me say anything today, it's only about this top piece of the triangle.
We have to have a conversation.
So any audiences that sit underneath this triangle or underneath this 10K bar, we don't count them. We can only speak to this top 30%. Okay, it's very, very important. The piece of work we do, we're in our 10th year. We've been doing this for quite a long time, and we get about 33,000 people. That's what we got this year, about 30,000 typically to answer our survey. And it allows us to try and paint pretty accurate pictures of these 12.8 million people who sit in this area, the segment of South African consumer society. It's super important. You got 100% of the personal tax base sits in there. It's a very metro-orientated, metro-skewed audience. And what's important about it is that what we're able to do is we're able to get small groups of very interesting and very sophisticated consumers in our piece of work. So for media players that have very, very high-end or sophisticated audiences, they generally are not going to be found by establishment or landscape surveys. They live behind the security fences, and they're hell of a hard to find. So trying to profile them, it's not a weakness in the establishment. The establishment surveys are there to paint very big pictures of the whole 43 million adult society. Because we're only looking at this 12.8, it's easy for us to go in and find these people, get them to tick a box, and then we can profile them. Okay, so that's where everything I'm about to show you comes out of this piece of work. And as I said, we are in year 10. We'd like to think we're getting better at it, not worse. The first thing I'd like to share with you is before I told the Star team, before I presented all of this stuff to them, said I wanted them all to go and watch a video. And I don't know if you guys have seen this. I was tempted to play it for you. It literally is 3.5 minutes long, but I'm not going to play it for you. If you've never seen it, go to TED.com. You can go into YouTube, type in how to start a movement. This guy, Derek Sivers, did an amazing little video. It's just about how to start a movement, how revolutions and movements happen. And he tells the story about it's about this guy who's at an outdoor rock concert or music concert, and he goes onto the hill and he starts dancing in this crazy kind of way. And he looks like a complete fool. He's the lone nut on the hill. And then somebody else goes and joins him and also starts dancing all funny and crazy. And then before long, like there's this massive crowd. And it's a whole story about how you start a movement, any kind of audience growth with a few lone nuts. They're joined by some other people who share some sort of common interest, and then before long you've got an audience. And I think that at this stage of Star's kind of life cycle, it's pretty obvious that there's a small core group of people who've started listening to the station with intent. They're super interesting, as I'm about to show you, and we can only imagine what will happen as sort of the layers of the onion start developing around this core group. So So just bear this in mind as I talk you through. We're trying to work out what is the star movement, who's the lone nut on the hill, and who's joined him to start this thing happening. Okay. Just to position the big old radio landscape at the moment and where we see things happening. So this is the left-hand side is the result from 2021. The right-hand side is 2022. When we look at the total overall national radio listenership, in the term I'm going to use for you is middle class and up, which is what the BrandMapp audience is. Okay, middle class and up, people living in households earning 10,000 Rand a month or more. When we look at them and we say, how are you listening to radio? These are the answers that we get. So you can see in 2021, 95% of the total audience do listen to radio. 20% of them said hardly ever. On the other side, you got 34% saying a few times a day. So you can see that what we see from 2021 to 2022 overall is actually a slight increase in radio listenership. So we saw a slight decline, about a 10% decline because of COVID. Obviously, people not listening to radio in their car had a huge amount to do with it, but there were all sorts of other effects, the impact of streaming, etc. We've seen quite an interesting global recovery. It's 5% up, so it's not quite back to where it was, but it's pretty damn close. Very importantly for this discussion, we've always measured listening to radio online, and it's super interesting because the more work we do in this sort of top third of the market, the more we realize that radio online listenership is just it's going to become a huge factor, streaming listenership. And it's interesting because we're in the industry, so we talk about devices, and we talk about online streaming, we talk about but who's listening on DVD and who on DSTV and who's listening, but actually out there in the consumer marketplace, people are just listening to radio. And I think we're going to have to get better at understanding that these audiences, something like your broadcast footprint is not quite as relevant as it used to be. Anyway, just so you've got it, that's the global number. Obviously, 10 years ago, this was down at 0. We now measure almost 50% of people saying I occasionally or often listen to radio online. That's obviously, I would imagine streaming is part of that equation. Okay. What happened when we look at Joburg? So, obviously, sure, almost 50% of our total sample comes from Joburg. So we're able to collect really nice big groups of people listening to Gauteng regional radio. This looks very different to what you may have seen before from a Rams style kind of a view of Gauteng radio, but we are talking about middle class and up radio. Okay. And that's kind of the split as we see it. These stations year on year have gone up and down a little bit. And for the first time ever down at the bottom, we put star in and we actually managed to get some people to tick the box. So they're on the map. Finally, star for the first time is on the map, and we are hoping and we're sure that they're just going to increase their footprint as time goes on. So right now, if we had the first question is, can we take a good guess at roughly how many people might be listening to Star FM? Well, we can apply the same metrics that any research does. This, let me just say before I show you the next slide, it is not our job to try and work out how many people are listening to Star FM, but we can have a big old guess, and we can have a guess based on pure mathematics. So we know that the 10K plus population in Gauteng has increased by about 300,000 to 400,000 people in the last year. So it's sitting on about 5.1 million adults, and we know that 1% was actually 1.275 or something. We believe that 1% right now translates to approximately 43,000 total listeners. It's a super interesting number. It's kind of, I think it's about Wanderers cricket ground. So it's not hundreds of thousands yet, but it means there are definitely people listening to the station. Who are these people? Kind of critical. So this is a very basic demographic dashboard. I don't fry your brain on it too much. It could give you an aneurysm this early in the morning. What we're looking at here is just simple demographic banners, demographic columns, and then the radio stations across. So you can very quickly see with something like female versus male, where these stations show particular skews. Okay. Again, what's interesting about these stats is if you stack them up against something like if you stack them up against whatever the BRC does have for some of the bigger stations, often they're very similar for the bigger stations. The smaller stations, we've got sort of far bigger samples, or at least statistically viable samples. But the pictures that you're looking at here are super simple. So when you see red, it's a big old skew. When you see bold, it's a slight skew. What's interesting about this picture, don't get too kind of caught on the actual figures. Just look and see how much red, how much black and how much dark there is and how much red there is. And you start understanding what we consider to be the power of regional radio, that this is a space where we see huge differentiation. If you go into something like the life insurance market, or even the investment financial service providers, you see a huge degree of homogeneity across brands. In regional radio, we see massive differences for obvious reasons. Okay, there's a lot of different ways that you can profile yourself as a station. And when we see Star FM, look how highly differentiated it is. Look at the age differentiation. They've really managed to capture it's not necessarily a youth group, it's that 25 to 34 sitting bang in there. It's got a bit of a male skew. Ethnically, definitely looks like it's a bit skewed. And most interesting, on the far right-hand side, that's the top end, is that very top of the triangle. It's people living in 40,000 rand households. And we are already showing stars having quite a significant skew. So if you just took all the fluff away and looked at it, this is how I would describe the demo dashboard right now. The star audience, highly differentiated, relatively high income, very millennial, Black African male listenership. To me, it feels like what I've said right there. It feels like the new suburban elite. My partner Stuart and I were up in Johannesburg for the first time in 3 years post-COVID, about 3 weeks ago, and we went into what I believe you guys are all terming the new north, somewhere north of Woodmead and south of Mall of Africa. And I just, it's an area of Johannesburg that I'm not familiar with. In 3 years, I don't think you guys who live there realize how it's just completely exploded. And man, it's like we sat in a couple of restaurants looking around the parking lot, feeling very Cape Townian and very poor. Anyway, so it looks to us like Star has managed to capture this new suburban elite. This chart here is just showing you that middle class top end stacked up. So the ones on the right hand side have the highest percentage of top end listeners, and Star is sitting right on the right hand side of this chart, together with the likes of Hot and Mix, Talk Radio. So immediately something interesting has happened here. Before I show you a little bit more about these people specifically, I also just want to show you a super interesting metric. So P1, P2, you guys have, I'm sure those of you who in radio are familiar with the term. It's basically just your fanatics measure, right? So your most often listened to, or your favorite radio station. In BrandMapp this year, we measured it very simply. There is no technical definition of P1, P2, or no globally accepted. We did it like this. Once you ticked all the radio stations you listened to, you could tick one of them and specify it as which one of them is your favorite radio station. That's it. That's how we asked the question. The results were fascinating. This is just the top the top 10 in Gauteng. It's a super interesting list when you consider how specific the programming and how specific some of the radio programming is on these stations. Impact obviously is a Christian station. Hot has a very specifically defined music programming strategy. Talk Radio is Talk Radio, and boom, in there sits Star already, really high up in terms of its P1 footprint. In other words, 37% of all the people who ticked a box to say I listen to Star said it is my favorite radio station. So that's immediately something is showing here that the station has caught the imagination of the people who are listening to it. And the start of that story definitely has to be the power of music. If we look at the Star listener versus the rest of people in Gauteng, these listeners they're not average for a start. The question here, is once you've ticked why is it your favorite radio station, you're then asked what are the reasons why you listen to that station that you call your favorite radio station. And you can see that the Star listener is a sort of fairly fairly differentiated creature. They're quite demanding. Music is much more important than the average listener. They have the best competition, so they're picking up on the fact that there's competitions going on in Star that they love. The support for local artists is great. It means that there's something they're tapping into, some sort of zeitgeist here with a specific audience, and it's all about the music. I could get deep into the music for you. I'm sure some of the Superkazi and the guys will probably show you some interesting charts, but let me just show you for now what we can identify and what I can put hand on heart and say these Star listeners we found are seriously urban contemporary. My little joke, they must have some rad playlists on Apple Music. Why do I say that? Well, as a completely differentiated question, it's actually the first question we ask in the whole survey is which of these are your favorite musical genres? It's a way of getting people into the survey so that they feel like they're answering a question that's actually fun before we start asking them all of the boring stuff like where do they bank? And then, 25 minutes later, they're answering questions about radio. So these two things are completely separated. But at the end of the day, we can take them and cross-tab them and go, what do we know about people who listen to specific radio stations? How does their musical taste differ from one another? So on the left-hand side is what the total Gauteng audience comes back with when we say, which of these genres of music do you most frequently listen to? R&B tops the bill, then gospel, then dance house, pop, hip hop, etc., all the way down to folk and a little bit of heavy metal down at the bottom. So how does the Star FM listener rack up? Well, the Star FM listener looks like that. Way more hip hop. These things are just much more important. Look at the rap up from 17 to 37%. So we're starting to understand that this is a very, very different audience when it comes to music. They clearly have different tastes. It clearly looks a lot younger, and definitely, I think the concept is what we used to call, when I was in the music industry, the urban contemporary listener. I think the definition still holds, and it certainly looks like that's what we found with Star FM. Okay, so effectively, we think that we have now discovered that lone nut and a couple of his followers on the hill. So let me introduce you to him. The charts I'm about to show you are going to rack up the Star FM listeners against everybody from Gauteng who listens to radio but doesn't listen to Star. Okay, so it's trying to define or trying to give you a relative picture. Star's always going to be in red, the rest always going to be in gray. In BrandMapp, we cover pretty much every aspect of consumer life you can imagine. It is a landscape style survey. So we've got all of this information about sports and interest in finance and banking. And Superkazi and the team will definitely, they can show you slides that connect Star FM's audience and any of these things, right down to loyalty programs and air travel and what cars they drive and a whole bunch of stuff. I've gone in and I've pulled out literally 20 slides that I'm gonna rip through and show you some of the things that we think are interesting about these people. But just so you know, if you're looking to try and make a direct association between a station and a brand that you're working on or a category, the guys have got the slide pack here and we'll be able to show you. Okay, so who's the lone nut? Well, first of all, these guys are highly educated. 43% have been to varsity, 17% postgrad, and 26% bachelor's degree. The only reason why that's not higher yet is because they're obviously a little bit younger. But a seriously well-educated group of people. This is such an interesting slide. Look at the living with parents versus the rest, and what you immediately see is that you've got sort of two kind of groups of people here. You've got definitely 30% of people who are still living with folks, but we don't know totally whether they're living with folks or folks are living with them. Look how much more likely they are to have a domestic worker. Look at how likely they are to have children. And if you add 37 and 29 together, it means that 66% of them are actually partnered up, right? So super interesting. 91% of the people who do have kids, which is, if you add up 17 and 17 and 21, that's 34 plus 21, 55%. 91% of the people who have kids under 18. Yeah, so it's a really there's families and there's singles listening to the station. Of the people who do have children, I love this slide because it just starts talking a little bit to mindset. So we know that they're a relatively wealthy audience. Look how they skew up for having their kids at a private school. But also I love that little 16% saying I'm homeschooling my child. So already we're starting to get a picture of the just a slightly different mindset here. You know, somebody who's going to homeschool their children is definitely embracing a more modern approach to the world. We put all of the metrics in for SEMs, and these are, you have to ask these questions in order to establish SEMs. On the far left-hand side, you'll see two fun ones, a swimming pool and an air fryer. I put air fryer in as a little bit of a joke. I'm not even going to go there. But look at the column next to the home security service, which is actually an SEM variable. 58% of these people saying that they have a home security service, right? So again, it's the suburban elite flag that for me.
Sorry, guys, I lost everyone there. It was beloved load shedding. We're back.
Oh, dear. Did I disappear as well, or did everybody just did?
You disappeared from me. I think if everyone.
No, Brandon, you were fine.
Was I just charging along in the dark?
You were just charged. Oh, I was there. I was right here by your side, Brandon.
Okay, fabulous. If I disappeared into the dark, that'd be terrible. That'd be like the dark side of the moon on a Thursday morning. Okay, I'm going to keep going. So we're starting to see some definite flags here. You know, these are sort of highly independent thinking people. They're clearly living in security sort of environments. A lot of them have kids. There's a component which looks sort of relatively younger without kids. What more do we know about them? Well, an incredibly high percentage of them are. So what's interesting is they're not students and scholars. Okay, that's not who these people are. There's a fairly high percentage of non-working husbands and wives. 33% though self-employed. So these are not freeloading students, which was one of my first thoughts. They're a different type of people. This does start looking like a very new suburban elite. How many people work in their companies? Well, 34% of them said it's just me. So if you combine, I'll just go back a slide. 33% of them are self-employed. 34% of them say it's just me. So there's quite a lot of people who are clearly going to be self-employed entrepreneurs that sit in this group. And one of the things I can say with some certainty is that for that 34%, home and office are one and the same. So this was a new metric we put in this year. We were trying to identify hybrid work. And if you look at the gray, okay, so the way it works is the question is, how do you think you'll be working? When you look at the year ahead, how do you think you're going to be spending your time at work? Of everybody, about 40% said I'll work all day in the workplace. So interesting that 60%, therefore, of the total audience in South Africa, this is the global number stays the same, said they will be working at home to some degree. That's a fascinating stat because, so this is of employed people, obviously. The fascinating stat is that before COVID, the best studies that I've found indicated that somewhere between 22 and 25% of people considered working at home in any way capacity at any time, even one day a week, you know. And now look, we're up to 34% or 18% of the total pop saying all day, but 34% of these star listeners are sitting at home, or not sitting at home, they're working from home. I think it's a fascinating insight into kind of consumer behavior. Think about how this changes, you know, the time of day when people are listening to something like radio. Think about how it impacts on their consumer lives. Think about how it impacts on how you're messaging to them when they're sitting, if they're sitting working on their computers and they've tuned into Star FM on their computer and they're listening on their headphones. Imagine how you can start to impact and change and affect their behavior in a very different way than the person who's stuck at an office. It's fascinating stuff. Okay, so now we know that it looks like they're staying at home. They're working from home quite a lot, and now when we ask the question, which of these occupations, do you fit into any of these specific professional occupations? we start seeing some really interesting little skews. So 14% of these guys saying I'm an IT security specialist, 9% in software, 3% systems analysts. So they're skewing up for all of these little, let's call it the tech industry. It's the first little indication that we might be honing in on who these people are. The second question we ask about work is what work industry you're in, and boom, now we have the answer. These guys are clearly tech heads. 27% over-indexing for computers and software. It feels to me, and this is a theory completely untested. I'm just going to throw a what if story out at you. I'm busy trying to research the growth in tech departments in corporate South Africa, because when you think about it, 10 years ago even, if you go back 15 years, say, the tech department in most companies was like one guy who knew how to do the email and clear the hard drives, and another oak who knew how to run the network, But these days, companies, got these ever-expanding technical teams. And I believe that that's driving a lot of the growth in the top of the middle class and the top end. And maybe that is what we're seeing in that sort of expanding upper middle class community development in the Joburg area in particular. We certainly see some of it down here in Cape Town. So I just have a feeling that there's this big growing group of technically minded, technically skilled people, very much in the IT world. And there's no doubt that they're the people who have first started listening to Star FM. Those are your lone nuts. They are, we're not talking, they're not computer geeks or nerds. I'll show you that in a moment. They're highly skilled workers, and they're just very, very skewed to the tech industry, which probably explains why in a year, that's the little bubble that's formed around Star, because these are the kind of people, imagine how highly engaged they are and how connected they are as a tech community, right? So word will spread very fast. All you need is a couple of people to drop something onto a social platform saying, I'm loving Star FM, and it's gonna create a little bit of a dance party on the hill. Okay. What else do we know about them? Well, 51% of them own their own home. That much we established in the data. Again, it's the new suburban elite personified. And look at where they're living. So what kind of property do you live in? 27% security estates, 28% apartments or flats. So these people are living in a really secure, this is call it the new secure suburban elite. Really, really interesting people. They are not complete geeks though. One of the things that we've discovered, they are completely obsessed with sports. And remember, there is a male skew to this audience, but it's only a 62-38 skew. So it's not like it's a 90% male skew. It just feels like a group of people who are pretty interested in things like sport. And they're interested in funny, like not funny, but what I'd call more, again, it's the urban contemporary sport environment, combat sports, mixed martial arts, a bit of basketball, road running events, lots of motorsports, swimming, rugby, soccer, cricket. It's kind of across the board, obsessed with sports. So definitely not just a bunch of computer geeks sitting playing computer games. That's what they're interested in. And when you ask which of the sports that you're interested in do you actually play, you start seeing some interesting skews as well. So that they are definitely young, very active human beings. The interesting one here always is I don't play any sports. That's the second column from the right. You'll see 25%. That's, again, a global statistic. Whenever we look at any audience in South Africa, we discover that about 25% of people are couch potatoes. Why I like it in this context is that, I think we all imagine these computer geek people from sort of movies and things to not be active people like this. This is a different generation. It's a different crowd, and it's a different consumer, a different listener. The computer is not a lifestyle. It's their work. Their lifestyle is far more active and out there. You see from this slide that the gym and gym training is still like the biggest activity that they engage in. And I love this one it's a little bit of a joke. I hope that there's no one who well, actually, if anybody on the call is working with Virgin, maybe it'd be a good idea to try and speak to these guys to get them into Virgin, because at the moment They're not there. They are in independent gyms, probably in their complexes or in the security estates that they live in, I would imagine. But really, so you're starting to hopefully, like, you can paint a picture of this person in your head, you know. What pastimes and interests do they have? Well, I told you that they weren't just video gamers, but they do definitely have a skew. So on the far left-hand side, you'll see esports and video games, 46%. So they definitely are way over-indexing for being those digitally engaged people. But then at the same time, look at the other skews over the rest. So far more interested in movies. That's definitely a youth skew, but also more interested in reading. If you think they're just sitting at home content with their computers, they way over-index on socializing compared to everybody else. And they also over-index on wine tasting. So sure, when I looked at this, the term that came to mind for me, I don't know how familiar you are with the term Renaissance man, in this case, Renaissance men and women. Renaissance man, if you look it up, refers to somebody who has a broad interest in many things in life. And embraces kind of all aspects, as many aspects as possible. It's the kind of person who thinks it's fine to love hip hop and classical music on the same level and play both of them at the same evening that you're playing Scrabble, chess, and cooking dinner for your friends. You know, these are Renaissance men and women. That is what sort of defines the new suburban elite. On a practical level, what does all of this mean? Well, I've shown you already that they're top enders. They skew for the top end, so they're highly educated, highly employable, and employed human beings. When we ask how are you feeling financially compared to 2 years ago, look how much better off they're likely to be feeling than the rest of the middle class and up in Gauteng. 47% of them actually saying better off, 24% the same as. So COVID didn't impact this group of people quite as badly as everybody else. You know, they were sitting at home doing their thing, clearly on computers, part of the new global elite. You know, they also really don't need debt busters. When we ask the question, how are you feeling about debt? I always call this my debt stress index. If you look at the rest, you'll see 52% of the rest of people either said, I don't have debts or I feel in control. And another 20% of people saying, I'm nervous, and the effect they would have. But if you want to talk about debt stress, you almost have to look at the far right-hand side and say, you know, of everybody, 28% are very worried or think their debt's out of control. So interestingly, for the Star FM listener, we've seen they have that younger component. There are quite a lot of them who are more likely to be debt stressed, but crucially, it's the far left-hand side where the stories to be told. These are highly educated young elite employees, and 47% of them said I feel in control. You know, so what does this mean? Well, interestingly, for debt, it doesn't mean that they're not going to assume debt and they're not going to take out home loans. In fact, they're more likely to. It just means that they're comfortable, that they're in control of their lives and they can pay their debts off. You know, so hugely good credit customers. Bottom line. Despite all of this, what I think is fascinating is that being the new or the younger urban suburban elite, they're not quite as sophisticated when it comes to banking products yet. So look at credit card under indexing, look at current account under indexing. These are people who are still they're still ripe for to be sold something like financial services and products. And throughout the data pack in various segments and various areas that I'm sure you guys work in with many of your clients, you'll find these kind of opportunities. So we think that they're still relatively unsophisticated banking clients. That said, they are the kind of people who I think at the moment are causing Capitec a headache, right? We know that Capitec's had this unbelievable growth for the last couple of years. We definitely saw them having an impact in the middle class. But there's this sort of theory doing the rounds in the financial world that Capitec has a problem because it hits a ceiling, and at that ceiling you've got cool, young, educated professionals who don't really want to be pulling out a Capitec card to pay for dinner with their friends. They'd far rather be pulling out an FNB a platinum card and getting their e-bucks, and we definitely see it there. So it's just a nice little indicator. Again, you can start filling in a picture of these people really easily. This is the investment products that they currently own. So if you look at the far left-hand side, again, I don't own any. They actually over-index for not owning any investment products. What are they invested in? Well, completely off the charts for crypto, and totally off the charts for ETFs, exchange-traded funds. So these are primarily digital-based instruments, right? It's a beautiful story. It all fits into everything that I've told you so far. So I think that if we have a theory about these guys being that new suburban elite digital tech head, savvy young people, it shows in something as simple as their investment behavior. And that, of course, is going to change who, where, and why the companies that they choose to work with and to invest with. Look at how they over-index for the digital bank Time Bank as an FSP used. Look how they're over-indexing for easy equities. So the bottom line is, if you're in any industry that is trying to tap into a very, very digitally savvy audience, we've just found them for you. These are proper digital warriors. I'm going to finish off with 3 slides quickly about their general digital behavior, just to sort of complete the story. The first thing is that just imagine who these people are. This picture that I've painted of you, fairly, very wealthy people with access to all sorts of devices. Data's certainly not a problem. They've all got fiber in the home. And not surprisingly, their behavior becomes very streamer orientated. So, way over indexing for something like Spotify, way over indexing for Amazon Prime. And then again, because of that sort of youth, the much younger element that we're picking up, I think that's why some of them over index. So you've got these 2 audiences. They're both young audiences. The one is just sort of starting the journey, but the preponderance of the star audience are the kind of people who are just permanently linked in as digital nomads, digital citizens. The place where it really shows for me is here. So, podcasting, especially in radio, we're starting to talk about how do we define radio on demand versus podcast. Because I think for the majority of listeners, a podcast is simply something that you download. So they're not differentiating. I think that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about a combination of actual podcasting and also just of digital download, so audio on demand in general. And these guys are like completely off the charts. 50% of them saying I listen to podcasts, I download and listen to podcasts a few times a week. You can see the extent to which it's an over-index. So, what does it all mean when you add it together? Well, I think that one of the most interesting things about these kind of consumers, this young radio audience we're talking about, is that there are so many more touch points in their lives. There are so many ways of contacting, of making contact with them, that you can trigger behavior in many, many more different and more interesting ways. And radio is definitely right up there as one of them. Okay. The question that we ask here is, it says the chart is titled Effective Media Channel. The question we ask is, which of these media have carried an advert that actually made you go out and buy something in the last year? It's a very specific question. It's just a way of gauging, people's self-awareness about the channels that they use that are likely to push them. We've already shown you how important digital media, YouTube, the podcasting, Instagram, we know that it's all obvious, but look how the star guys are over-indexing as well for radio being a recognized behavioral impactor. I think it's extraordinary. Just an amazing group of people, lots of different ways of getting them to talk. And if you can imagine starting a conversation in this group of people, how powerful that can be, because they are the kind of people you want and need to amplify any message, whether it's the message that says you guys should be listening to Star FM, or whether it's a message that says you should be using a brand or behaving in a particular way. It's a fabulous looking audience, super exciting. So we started off with a question, who's listening to Star FM? I showed you that picture, and I tell you what, it's pretty damn close to what we believe the Star listener to be, and certainly what the data is showing us. It's an incredibly exciting audience. If you want to find this guy and his family, you'll find him listening to Star 91.9. It really is the first time we've identified a specific audience that looks like this, and we think they are like a really lucrative and wonderful little pocket sitting up there in the northern suburbs of Johannesburg. Yeah, and that's that. That's all I have for you. I didn't want to overload you with too much stuff. As I said, the team are sitting with the full slide pack. And if you want any specific insights or specific data points, they can connect you up with it. But yeah, I hope that made sense to you. I hope you guys are as excited as I am to find a little group, some lone nuts dancing with their. I just saw things saying, do we know when they're listening? We do indeed have a listening frequency chart, or sorry, a time of day chart. What is interesting is these guys are everybody's really over-indexing for morning rather than, the earlier in the day, the better. And then during the day, driving around during the day is the third biggest listening moment. But the team have got the chart. They can show you exactly what our data says about listening frequency. Okay.
Bran, I think there was a few questions from Joanna. Joanna, as we went, I know Brandon answered a few. Do you just want to ask what he wasn't able to cover?
Yes, please. Sorry, just a construction site. How's it, Brandon?
All good. What can I answer for you, Joe?
So the question is because I know that obviously BrandMapp looks at the 10K plus population, but in the demographic breakdown, there was at the right-hand side of the slide, middle class versus top end. So within the data, how do you define the differentiator between middle class and top end? Understanding that a lot of your respondents said that they earn million gazillions. So what do you use the lens?
Yeah, so the lens there is, so the way we break it down is 10,000 Rand a month to 40,000 Rand a month household income is what we call the middle class. So 40,000 is quite high. I mean, it's a fairly broad spectrum that. Effectively what it means is you're a taxpayer. Okay, if you earn 10,000 Rand a month as a household, there's a high likelihood that you're a tax-paying household. That goes up to 40,000, and we've just always used 40,000 as an interesting mark because at 30,000 personal income, we know that there's about 2.5 million South Africans who sit in there. So it's a fairly defined little group at the top. But when I showed you that chart earlier, the middle class is people living in households earning 10 to 40, and the top end is 40K plus households. There are only like 2.8 million of them in South Africa. So it's a fairly small group, which means when you over-index, like we're talking about, it's 30% or 32, can't remember exactly what it was, 30% versus 22% of the total population. It's a significant skew. These are, they're not necessarily earning gazillions, but sorry, I think did you mean the whole of BrandMapp earns gazillions? But
yes,
40K. It's an interesting number. We 2 weeks ago, we had the UCT Unilever Institute come out with their definition this year of the middle class in South Africa. And their middle class definition was a net 22,000 Rand household income. Okay, so what we're calling the top end is what UCT are now calling the middle class. So you've got to be careful with these definitions. That's our definition of the middle class. Okay.
And then one last question, Brandon, because this audience is all into sports. Did we include watch esports again this year into the survey?
We didn't put esports in. We had it as you would have seen it as a hobby and pastime. Okay, so that would presumably be as playing. Joe, it's interesting. I think we might have had a chat about this a few years ago, but I'm still not convinced that I think it's large as a pastime, but the actual sporting activity, the the actual sport, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
It is quite a small footprint. You know what I mean? It's a bit like MMA as well. You know, MMA's got a lot of you saw the level of interest of these guys in mixed martial arts, but geez, there's just not that many people who are going to actively take the chance of being smashed in the face for fun, you know. So I think competitive esports is probably still not, it's probably not measurable. You know what I mean? Skateboarding is only just measurable. But as a general interest, we've got it sitting there in the sports and interests, and you can see the level we're very high with these guys. It's a young, engaged digital audience. Yeah.
That's all for me. Thank you, Brandon.
Cool.
Okay.
Anyone else got any questions?
I think Adrian.
We perhaps want to just read out the question from Adrian. So Brandon,
Oh, sorry,
Adrian,
I can't see.
Adrian has asked, no, that's fine. Adrian has asked, do we know when they are listening? And then Karen, maybe you can feed this back to Adrian afterwards, what the total footprint is.
I think so I tried to answer that earlier. We definitely do have the listenership charts. What I can tell you is that what we know from before COVID. So we measured listening in 2019. We didn't measure it in the year of COVID. We measured it the year after COVID. So and now we've measured it again this year. The first thing I can tell you is that for this group of people, for the middle class and up, we just saw afternoon drive time taking a going down like significantly, and that's obvious, right? Because if 40% of these people are working from home, you can imagine that their habits have changed a lot. What we saw at the same time was driving around during the day listening to the radio suddenly became the second highest listening opportunity. Okay, and that story has maintained. So your morning drive time, call it, is higher than ever. And for this star audience, it's even higher than the rest. Okay, they are more likely than the normal people to be listening to radio in the morning. But the next highest opportunity for them is driving around during the day. Simple as that. I think that our choices as consumers have just been, and especially for these digital people, their consumer choices in terms of entertainment are just so kind of overloaded. Once they get into the day, you know, they've got Spotify and Audible and Netflix and blah, 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 and radio, and they're still listening to it, but it's the morning where radio really, really still plays like an unbelievably big part of their lives. Yeah. But the charts are in the pack. Yeah. Okay. I've just got a flash saying we've got 5 minutes left in the meeting, which means we're going to all disappear in a cloud of smoke.
Shame, are there any other last questions?
Still, Adrian.
Okay, nothing. Thank you, Bran.
Cool. Only a pleasure.
We'll take it from here, guys. Anyone that has any questions, please feel free to relay them to me. Let's have the conversation. If you don't have my email address, it's caren@star919fm.co.za. And Sipogazi at star919fm.co.za, and we can answer anything that you'd like. Thank you, Brandon. You were absolutely amazing, and this is a very exciting time for us as a station. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Only a pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for joining us and listening. And have a lovely day out there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool.
Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Thank
guys.
you.
Bye. Thank you.